Welcome to TSRA-2A Ricochet. Your host is Andy Turner, the Legislative Director podcast of the Texas State Rifle Association. We'll discuss your 2A rights, legislation, hunting, competition, you name it. Join in and be part of the discussion. Now here's your host, Andy Turner.
Welcome back to TSRA-2A Ricochet, episode number 2. We are back with, if you saw the rough draft, you met my friend Erik The Red. And so Erik is going to be regular co-hosting on here, so you'll see quite a bit of him. Last episode, we had the president of TSRA on, and Daryl Valdez. And so if you haven't seen that episode, please do go back and check it out, so you can know who the president of TSRA is and what his opinions are and where he comes from and all kinds of neat stuff. We had started going over some of the bigger bills during session the last time, and we did talk about permitless, and we talked about suppressors and how ain't nobody gonna get one by Christmas, and I explained why, but we didn't get to some of the other bills, and we did get the hotel bill, but we didn't get to some of the other bills. The other big bill that went through was Sancuary State. Governor Abbott called out for it in his State of the State address, if you remember, if you watched it. So what a 2A Sanctuary State is, for those of you that weren't playing along during session, is it's similar to an illegal immigration or illegal immigrant sanctuary state. It says that if you are, in this case, if you are going to be anti-2A, you don't get the taxpayers' money. So, in other words, once this bill passed, and I think after it went into effect, I started seeing articles, Citigroup and I forget what, some of the bigger banks were all whining and crying about it, because basically if you have a written policy that you will not do business with, say, an FFL, right? Say your local FFL. And literally when we were at the hearing for this, I heard a gentleman who said, I'm an FFL. I was opening a storefront, and I went to a bank. I don't want to misattribute, so we'll say a bank, and said, hey, I need a business loan. And they were like, yeah, we don't do business with anybody that supports guns and gun businesses. So I went to B Bank, and B Bank told him, and these are big banks. These are multi-state banks. These are not like little, local banks. And he eventually found his loan, but
that goes back to the Obama, what did they call that? The chokehold?
Yeah. You want to explain that?
That was just a bill that they passed when Obama was in office that basically discouraged any banks from doing business with any gun business owners. Definitely curtailed the banks from giving them loans or any of that stuff as well.
Yep. So in response to all of that, then Representative Justin Holland and Senator Bob Hall sponsored the 2A Sanctuary State bill, and it passed and was signed, and it is now the law of the land. And of course, some of these huge banks like Citigroup whining and crying and this and that and the other thing, and all they had to do really was sign a form that says we have no policies or rules or whatever that says we will not do that stipulates that they won't do business with. It doesn't have to be FFLs; it can be anybody in the gun industry. So if you want to start Erik The Red and start making your own rifles and selling them in a storefront, not necessarily, that's a different kind of FFL, but you're still an FFL. So, but it really doesn't matter. If you have a policy, then you don't get taxpayer money. And I loved it. I thought it was great, because I don't want my money going to support banks that work against me. And I'm pretty sure you feel the same way. And I'm pretty sure everybody out there feels the same way. So it was a particularly great bill, and I was really happy to support it. So we got that one through. And then we have another bill that I'm sure other people have. other titles for. I think some people call it the Emergency Powers Bill. I call it the New Orleans Bill. So Representative Cole Hefner and Senator Brandon Creighton had a bill. And what it said was, in the time of a declared emergency, you cannot infringe on people's Second Amendment rights. Now, some of you are going, well, I mean, who would do that, right? Why do you need that? It's in the Constitution. Like, to we thinking people, that makes total sense. Except that, if you all remember during Hurricane Katrina, and do you remember the name of the mayor in New Orleans?
Not off the top of my head.
I can't think of his name either.
Yeah.
I probably should have pulled it in advance. But anyway, he started disarming his population because
door to door, taking people's guns.
And literally knocking on the doors, right?
Yep.
So, and I'm not sure, did you happen to read, did they all get their guns back?
They did not all get their guns back. Most of them did, but not all of them.
Not all of them. Great.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about people who weren't legally allowed to have them. We're talking about law-abiding citizens who didn't get their guns back because...
And it was a long, lengthy process, I'm sure.
Yeah. So we now have a bill that actually, forbids that. And again, this had nothing to do, and I wrote about this in the magazine, this had nothing to do with Governor Abbott, because good God, he gave us so much this year.
He did.
And our representatives and our senators fought like dogs, and TSRA was in the fight, and countless other groups were in the fight. So this is nothing to do with Governor Abbott. This is everything to do with what happens if Governor Abbott decides to retire someday. Not that he's retiring, he's running for office again. I'm just saying, at some point, he may not want to be governor. I don't know. Maybe it'll take 20 years. Who knows? But anyway, so I just wanted to make that clear that it had nothing to do with Greg.
No inside information here.
Right. Yeah. No inside information. So, but I call it the New Orleans bill because that's basically what it's meant to prevent. So that if, God forbid, we ever got a gun control governor in office, sure, they could repeal the law, but repealing that law is going to be very difficult. And then the last one, there were several big bills, but I just picked out some, the ones that were biggest for all of us. And then the other one is kind of personal. Some of you don't know, most of you probably don't know, I used to be a foster parent. I had actually adopted two boys out of Austin, but it was foster to adopt because that's the process. And so Representative Cody Harris, and I believe he told me he is a foster parent, and Senator Brian Birdwell, passed a bill that helps foster parents. And while this isn't significant for probably most of you, it's near and dear to my heart. And you have to understand that being a foster parent it's tough, because you aren't getting a child who, like if you give birth to a child, they're your child and you shape them, and there's some nature and there's some nurture, but these kids have been damaged. And whether it's a little damage or a whole lot of damage, and so being a foster parent it's a science and an art and a lot of prayer.
Absolutely. And
so while I think absolutely if you have children in the house, you should, take care that your firearms are not easily accessible, because bad things happen. The law before September 1st was that if you were a foster parent, you had to have trigger locks on all your firearms. Those trigger locked firearms then had to go into a locked safe, and your ammunition had to go into another different locked safe.
Ridiculous.
So, yeah. And so in the event of, let's say, a home invasion, you've got to find the key to the ammo,
Not just one key.
Right. And you're not allowed to have them loaded, by the way.
Right.
So, So you got to go find the key to the ammo safe. You got to find the key to the gun safe, and you got to get the key to the trigger lock and load them up and try not to die
and hope all your fine motor skills are working during all that stress.
Right. And also the kids, right?
Yes.
Because you're trying to protect, because I mean, anybody that has kids, I have not met anybody that has kids, even if they have nieces and nephews, that if those kids were on the line, wouldn't lay down their lives for those kids. And foster parents are no different. So I was really happy to see that Representative Harris and Senator Birdwell got this bill through that says, no, you can put it all in one safe.
Yes.
It's fine. It's under lock and key.
Yes.
You're good to go.
Yes.
So I'm really very happy to tell you about that one. And I know it doesn't affect most of you, but it's just an example of the breadth of the bills that we got passed this year.
Yes.
And the thought processes behind them. So, So that covers the end of last episode. So I'll put that note over here. And Citigroup is ready to getting back to the sanctuary. The 2A sanctuary state, according to Dallas Morning News. And I've pulled quite a bit, I realized, from the Dallas Morning News. Citigroup ready to restart its Texas underwriting after certifying it meets gun law restrictions. So they filled out the form. Now they're not whining. And so Citigroup they tend to invest in municipal bonds, and so they filled out the paperwork, and now Citigroup can go ahead. But there's some other I have a friend in Dallas who's in finance, and he was like, yeah, there's some very large financial organizations out there that are
Absolutely.
Really, they don't want to sign this form. They're like, the heck with you. And then state of Texas is like, well, your loss. I'm sure we can find somebody else to do business with.
That's right.
So,
and we can touch on it on another episode, but I mean, it kind of ties in with that. Congress is actually seeking right now, what is it, HR 5764, they're looking at getting banks to snoop on consumers when they buy guns and ammunition. They want banks to tattle to the Federal Commission and let them know how much you're buying, what you're buying, and whether or not they think you're a threat.
Now, my question about that is, first of all, I'm not sure do you happen to know, has that been scheduled? So the first step in a congressional bill, like anybody can file a bill.
Yes.
You file a bill that says, and this is true in Austin and it's true in DC. You can file a bill that says the moon is made of green cheese. That doesn't mean it's going anywhere. It means you filed a bill. Sometimes people file a bill just so you can go out and campaign and say, well, I filed this bill, and didn't go anywhere.
Right.
So the first step in DC is what they call markup. They evaluate the costs and all of the things that it would take to enact that bill and to keep it going. So, and then after markup, it gets scheduled for a hearing. So my question is, do you happen to know, because the last I heard that wasn't scheduled for markup, but I don't know.
They are still trying to, at this time, keep it out.
Okay.
They're saying that because before there was another bill that was very similar to it. So far, it hasn't moved anywhere.
And it was filed in August, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. Okay,
and
good.
They're trying to make sure that
Good
it
news.
doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
But just know that our Congress is trying to push that.
Who is the sponsor of that lovely piece of legislation so that we can just out them right now?
Let's see here.
Just for even being stupid?
Oh, let's see. It's going to be up here. Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. I'm trying to find the first page of the next article and
So
I
right
can't
now
find
we
it.
got U.S. Senator Ed Markey and U.S. Reps Madeline Dean and Jennifer Wexton.
Okay, these are not Texans.
Yeah, that's the U.S. House of Representatives. So we've got that'd be H.R. 5764 and S 3117.
So if those were filed in August and they haven't gone to markup yet, we've got a good shot here, but it is something to be aware of. Actually, following up on something that you and I talked about after we taped the rough draft, I did speak. Did I tell you this? I did speak to Congressman Crenshaw's office. This was several weeks ago. By the time you see this, several weeks ago, about the National Defense Authorization Act. And the problem with that bill is that there is a red flag in there,
yes.
red flag law for active duty military.
Right.
So I love me some Congressman Crenshaw. And, you know, is any legislator perfect? No, but I have found him to be remarkably consistent. And so I really like him. And plus, my God, I mean, isn't he a SEAL? I mean, whew.
I was very surprised to see that he was on.
So I called, right? I called and I spoke to his office and I said, so I understand the rest of the bill because it was about finding out what happened in Afghanistan. I did a lot of research before I called his office because you don't want your legislative director to sound stupid when she calls the office and is representing you. So I said, well, what is the deal? What do I tell people? I'm getting emails about this. And they said, no, it's going to go back to committee and they're going to try to strip it out. So as far as I know, that's in process. And frankly, it may end up killing the bill if they can't strip it out. So we'll see. I will keep my eyes on that. And I assume everybody knows what a red flag law is, but just in case, just to be on the safe side. So red flag law, it says that if your neighbor or some person, doesn't even have to be your neighbor, decides that, for instance, you own guns and they feel threatened by you, and how that's defined by any given judge could be as varied as the colors that will be on my Christmas tree. And then the police just show up. Like, you don't get notified, fully nothing. They just show up and take your guns.
Yeah, you don't get to speak on it. There's no due process.
You get to go to court afterwards and make your case and say, well, you know, I painted my fence blue with white polka dots and they didn't like that. And so I said, well, you know, it's my property. And they came to you and said they felt threatened by that. And are you kidding me?
I'm sure we can all see where this would go to with like a disgruntled ex.
Yeah. You know, or just neighbors who just...
a neighbor that just doesn't like you.
Yeah. And so, you know, there's all kinds of, you know, in Austin, there were red flag bills that various far lefties, tried to introduce. And I went up and testified and said, you know, look, 30 years ago, I dated the wrong boy. And, you know, so I'm a survivor of domestic abuse. And let me tell you something, I would have had no problem if the process then was the process now, I would have had no problem confronting him in court. But 30 years ago, the answer from the police was, and this was not in Texas, but 30 years ago, the answer from the police standard practice was, well, stop dating him. And so, you know, but I got no problem confronting you. If you're going to mess with me, I got no problem. And I understand that for other people, other survivors, it's not that simple. But we do not take away someone's Second Amendment rights without stringent due process. We do not do that. That's why we have the Constitution. So I tend to go off on red flag laws. I'm sorry. It really bugs me that somebody would think that taking away your rights based on someone else's say-so and without a judge's hearing from both sides is a good idea.
I know. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
So I fully expect that Congressman Crenshaw is not going to put up with this nonsense. But I will let you all know, or Erik The Red will let you all know. So a couple weeks, there's the front page. A couple weeks ago, I got a call from, trying to find his name, Todd Gilman from, because due credit, from the Dallas Morning News. And he said, and this was before Beto, am I saying this correctly? Beto O Rourke. Always want to get it right. Before he declared, and he said, you know, he's posturing like he's going to declare. And I'm sure you have opinions about that, but his statement about, you know, he was asked a question, you all will remember this. He was asked a question about, are you coming after our guns? And his answer was, hell yes. And he said, do you think that he can that he can get away from that statement? And in short, do you think that he can ever? Hold on. Do you think that's what it was? Do you think that this is going to follow him? And I was like, hell yes. I mean, pardon me, but yeah. So my exact quote was, and this was published. Well, of course I can't tell you because I forgot to circle it. But anyway, it was published October 15th. So this is probably 2 months ago by the time you see this. That's going to follow him for the rest of his life. Andy said, Andy Turner, legislative director for the Texas State Rifle Association. He didn't just say it once, and most Texans, they have the internet. Hell yes, it's going to follow him. Texans who believe in the Constitution and Second Amendment specifically are not going to tolerate gun confiscation from law-abiding citizens. And Todd goes on and says it wasn't the first or the last time that O'Rourke demanded mandatory buybacks of assault-style weapons. And we've seen that on a number of occasions. I need the computer to be going so I can... So we've seen that on a number of occasions from him. And you know, one of the questions that didn't get into the article was, he said, do you have plans to remind people? And I'm like, I don't think I need to. Like, I don't think I need to take out a digital marketing ad reminding all of you about Beto O Rourke's stance. And honestly, not too many, when he made that statement, not too many Democrats followed him. You know, they had he wanted mandatory confiscation, and some people talked about buybacks, whether they were mandatory buybacks or voluntary or whatever, but they didn't really. And then there was all this talk while Biden was running that Beto O'Rourke was going to be his gun czar and this and that and the other thing, and that didn't work out too well for him either. So he goes on in the article to talk about his options. You know, yeah, sure, he could backpedal because it was on the heels of a mass shooting in Texas, and he was running for White House at the time. I mean, sure, he could, but I don't think any of us are going to forgive that. He could.
Now he wants to run for governor, isn't that right?
That's what I'm hearing. So he can double down. Good luck with that in Texas.
I mean, how many times do you got to get told no?
Yeah. So and then he could also plead stress. Is what Todd Gilman reports in the Dallas Morning News article. Heat of the moment. But. There's no way anybody's going to forget that. And frankly, I have a bunch of friends. I don't need to do anything. You and I both have friends that they're going to be having a field day with these memes if this guy gets serious about it.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, I'm not worried. The internet will bake him.
Oh yes.
So, and then I think this is the last. Oh, maybe not. Oh, no. We have two things. There is, a lawsuit pending to expand handgun carry, and this is much more current news. And I would tell you the date of this article if I could find it, but I cannot. Okay. So this was this week, and it was written by a man named Daniel Friend. Anyway. There's a lawsuit pending to expand handgun carry from 21 to 18. And while, you know, the sponsors of the lawsuit say, you know, permitless carry was great and they're really happy about it, you know, you shouldn't have to be 21. And I mean, gosh, I bartended my way through undergraduate and graduate school. And I mean, my attitude was then, if you're old enough to fight and die for your country, if you're old enough to go to jail, if you're old enough to vote, if you are old, what else are you old enough to do at 18?
Quite a few things.
I mean,
old enough to get married.
Right. If you're old enough to be treated as an adult under the eyes of the law, why do you have to be 21 to own a handgun?
That's right.
I mean,
why do you got to be 21 to be able to defend your life?
I mean, you're willing to go defend your country.
Yep.
So, and die doing it.
Yep.
So, because when, you know, and I wrote about this in the November December magazine the TSRA puts out for its members. But when you join in the military, yes, you get a job. I'm so familiar with the Navy and the Marines that it's an MOS, and I forget what it is for the Army and the Air Force, but basically a method of service. But you don't know where that method of service is going to be. You might be in the middle of Afghanistan, and you could be guarding the Canada border.
Right.
I mean, I don't care. You're writing a check, and you don't know what's going to be on that check. You have signed a blank check, and God bless you all. It means everything to me. I don't know. Did you get your magazine yet?
No.
Okay. So in the magazine, I talked about, and I know I'm going off on tangent here, but I talked about a friend of mine, Susanna Warner, whose father was sitting on the floor of judiciary in another state that I moved here from years ago. And I was sitting, and somebody said, Jim Warner's here. I'm like, Susanna's dad? And they were like, yeah, that's not just Susanna's dad. He was in the Hanoi Hilton with John McCain.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, it blew me away because I have such absolute respect for all veterans. And by the way, welcome home. If somebody hasn't said it to you, if you are a Vietnam vet, welcome home. That was explained to me a couple months ago. So I just want to make sure that gets out there. But yeah, and I walked up to him and I said, look, I know you hear this 16 times a day if you hear it once, but I am deeply grateful for your service and what you went through. And it was a moment. It was one of those moments where you meet, when you meet a hero.
Right.
And he said, since I have a minute, he said, I have to tell you, I can't. What did he say? I think he said it was my honor. And I was just blown away by that answer.
Yeah.
I mean, it was his honor to fight, and he wrote the check and he was willing to cash it. And I mean, he tells some very interesting stories, but, see, this is why you all should be members of TSRA, because you could have read about this in the magazine, because there's more detail there. But I mean, what an amazing man for him to, I mean, he could have been bitter. He could have been a lot of things.
Yes.
He could have been pragmatic. He could have just blown me off and said, you're welcome, but, I was talking to some vets after I wrote the article, and they were like, now we know what to say, because apparently a lot of vets are a little bit uncomfortable when you thank them for their service. No matter how sincere you are, they feel a little on the spot, because whether they were in a hot zone or stationed out at San Diego or wherever, they don't really know how to answer that. And your welcome doesn't really do it for them.
Right.
And so I had a couple of vets who wrote in and said, now I know what to say. And I was like,
nice.
Well, it's not my idea. You can thank an American hero for that. So you're all heroes in my book.
Exactly.
So anyway, this lawsuit will move it down to 18 if they prevail. I don't know where this is going to go, but you can bet I'll be watching.
Yes.
And of course, Eric and I are rooting for this. So,
yes.
But yeah, I mean, if you can die for your country, I don't understand. And Daryl and I were talking, and I know you haven't seen it yet because it hasn't gone up yet. But we were talking. I asked him how he got started with guns, as I usually do everybody that I'm gonna have on the show,
right? To
talk about your background. And I said to him, who first put a gun in your hand or whatever? And he said it was a tradition handed down by his father. And I said, that's the way it is for most of us. So, I'm sure there are going to be people screaming about the blood in the streets if we give 18-year-olds guns. But first of all, remember, the average 18-year-old can't really afford a brand new handgun. I mean, they're a little expensive and they're busy trying to pay for other things. So some of them college, some of them rent, this and the other thing. So, and frankly, if their parents want to gift them a gun, then I think they should be able to do that.
Absolutely.
So, and the last thing for this episode is not directly 2A related, but I want to bring it up. And that is the redistricting that's going on. And I know you had some thoughts on redistricting.
Just what we had talked about prior to the show. I know you were mentioning one of the areas you had lived in and had done that, and they basically got rid of some Republican seats. And I know that they're trying to do that here in Texas as well.
Yeah. well, they're trying to get rid of. So the game that's being played here in Texas, if you've been paying attention to the redistricting efforts, is that the Democrats are very unhappy with the Republicans because the Republicans are trying to redistrict them out. Well, the interesting thing is, 10 years ago, when I did redistricting in the extremely blue state of Maryland, Barbara Mikulski style blue, the Democrats they managed to redistrict it, so we only had one Republican congressman. And now I'm reading there are efforts to try to redistrict him out. I don't know how they're going to do that because of the way that the way the parties lie. It's going to be a really tough thing. But Maryland was the second most gerrymandered state in the union at the time. Illinois, I know, Chicago, don't be too surprised. But Illinois was number one, I believe. And so, the whining and crying coming from the far left about the gerrymandering that's going on, at the end of the day, to the victor goes the spoils.
Right. So
if you can't whine about it here if you are doing it someplace else no. So you're either going to be fair or never. I actually worked a congressional campaign when I was in Maryland, and the campaign manager called me and said, "Hey, would you give me the borders for this particular congressional district?" And I said, "Sure." And so I went to Secretary of State, got the map, looked at the map, and went, "No." And he was like, "Well, how hard can it be? Because here's this really experienced guy. He runs all these congressional campaigns." And I was like, "I think I need to bring you. I don't want the map. If you have to give me it by street names." And I'm like, "No, you don't understand." Literally, there were parts of the district that part of one street on one side was this congressional district. The other side of the top of the street was that congressional district. And in the middle, kind of going diagonally, it was a third. This is the same street. So, they get a little wacky-dacky up there. So I'm done with all of it. Like, if you win the election, you get to make the maps. And, the bottom line is, if you want to vote, go register to vote.
Definitely.
So
everyone should be registered to vote.
I agree. And if you like your Second Amendment rights, absolutely, that is a good way to do that. That is it for this episode of TSRA-PAC Ricochet. Mm-hmm. So, did you have any final thoughts, comments? You're good? Okay. Well, I'm good, and we will see you very soon for episode 3 of TSRA-PAC Ricochet. My name is Andy Turner, Legislative Director for the Texas State Rifle Association, and this is the fabulous Erik The Red. And we will see you next time.
You've been listening to TSRA-PAC Ricochet with your host, Andy Turner, the Legislative Director podcast of the Texas State Rifle Association. And until next time, you can find out more at tsrapac.com and tsra.com.